Hey, this is David with PrepperBookshelf.com, and I want to do a review not just of one book, but of a series of books, 1 through 7. However, 1 through 3 I've loaned out, which is never a good thing to do because you don't hardly ever get them back. But that's okay because these books are so good that I plan on buying another set. So this is the Gingery series by David Gingery. Build your own metal workshop from scratch. Okay, and what's neat about this, what I love it, is because Dave Gingery had this philosophy of, he said he's always had these $500 problems, but he never had $500. And so he took his skill and he took his knowledge and his ingenuity and was able to solve $500 problems with $50 solutions. And so what he did is this book, this series of books, starts from scratch with basic hand tools and, you know, a bag of sand and a clay flower pot. And he shows you in book 1 how to turn a clay flower pot into a foundry to melt aluminum, to cast aluminum. And it goes in depths in the hows and the whys, but it's very readable, and each book is pretty small. Each book is about, you know, 150, 160 pages. And so he crams a lot of useful material into a short amount of space. And so each book builds upon the skills and the tools that you built in the books before it. So the first thing is you build this foundry, right? And then you build a metal lathe. And then you use the metal lathe and the foundry, you know, to make a drill press, to make a milling machine, to make a dividing head and accessories for your metal lathe, to make a sheet metal brake. And by the time that you're done, not only do you have an entire metal shop that you've built from scratch, but you have a lot of skills that you would have to go, you know, years at a trade school to learn. So it's a really awesome set, and it's relatively inexpensive. Gingery books, about anything Gingery writes, I can or has written, is way worth the time, even if you're not you know, into metalworking. They're very inexpensive, and as a prepper, if you're worried about some catastrophic collapse, you know, having this set, you know, you can start to recreate civilization with these sets of books. And so they're really, really great. I just would caution you, don't loan them out because they're so good you're probably not going to get them back. So until next time, you guys catch us on the PrepperBookshelf.com. Thank you. Hey, this is David with the Shepherd School, and today I want to show you another Lindsay reprint. This is a 1957 revision of a Navy 1944 document, the United States Navy Foundry Manual. And basically what this book is a textbook, a field manual of foundry work, how to recreate parts on board ship. And that's very, very important because, you know, if something breaks on a Navy destroyer out in the middle of the ocean, you know, you might not have time to get a replacement part. And so this book tells you how-to manual for molding and making molds and casting metal. It talks about alloys, copper-based alloys. It talks about how to build the furnace, different types of furnaces, you know, different types of molds and how to make your mold, how to design your mold. Very technical, but because it's a military manual, you know, military manuals, you know, the common theme is they're written for a 5th grade reading comprehension level, because you never know the type of person, the education level of the person that's going to read the book, and that's especially true for the Navy, right? So anyway, there's a lot of material packed in this book, and it's small print, lots of charts, lots of diagrams. Okay, if you're going to get involved with foundry work or metal work, very, very useful, and I would recommend it. It is a little more technical than the Gingery series, and you know, they don't talk as much about the why because it's designed, you know, for the how. Okay, so I would recommend this book as an addendum to the Gingery series or other casting books, if you're into that sort of thing. So anyway, until next time, you can always catch us online at PrepperBookshelf.com. Hey, this is David with PrepperBookshelf.com, and I've got a recipe book today, Country Beans by Rita Bingham, and it talks all about different ways of cooking beans. Now, if you're a prepper, especially if you're like me and follow the, the LDS year supply model, where you store a lot of beans, a lot of wheat, a lot of dried milk, salt, and once you get a year supply of the staples, then you start, looking at things to make it taste good. Well, this book goes into detail about how to make beans user-friendly, okay? You don't have to necessarily, soak your beans and have a pot of beans. This book is where I got the recipe that I used on tngun.com, to make the tofu. This talks about making, a bean cooked, dehydrated ground bean powder, so that you can make gravy in minutes, or make refried beans in minutes instead of hours. Talks about making tofu, talks about making soy milk, bean curd, different types of toppings, different types of seasonings, all sorts of different recipes, soups, hamburgers or bean burgers, all sorts of stir fry and puddings and pies and cakes, which is something that you don't really see very often with beans. And this is great as a recipe book, but it's awesome for some of the other things you can do for beans. Why should you store beans? Talks about making complete proteins, talks about fiber, nutrition, how to grind beans, how to sprout beans, which beans you can sprout and which beans you can't, because some beans are toxic to you when you sprout them, and this book talks about it, how to can them, all sorts of things. If you are going to be a prepper and you're going to store beans, this is one of the books that I think that you should get. And if you just want to eat healthy, then it's also, pretty good for that. Available, I guess, on Amazon. Personally, I went down to, what is it, Ready Made Resources, I think, down in East Tennessee, and I bought it there for about $15. And one of the few books that, if I only could just have a couple, this is one of the recipe books that I would have. So anyway, until next time, you can always catch us online at PrepperBookshelf.com. Thanks. Hey, this is David with PrepperBookshelf.com, and today I'm going to go over Fernando Aguirre's book, The Modern Survival Manual, Surviving the Economic Collapse. And this book is a really interesting book because it is based upon his experience in the economic collapse of Argentina back in 2001. And it talks about how he, survived, how he dealt with, feeding his family, those sorts of things, and what the government did, how they shut off the banks and how they only allowed you to get X amount of money a day. And if you had your bank account was denominated in American currency rather than Argentina currency, where they basically just shut you off. A lot of really good thinking points in here. This really isn't a how-to manual. It's more of his story. And he talks about, how he dealt with things and what jobs they were able to keep. Right? What sort of tools that was useful to him. Now, this is his opinion, and there's some things in this book that I really don't necessarily agree with. However, he's lived through it, and I've just read about it, right? And so he does get a little bit of, credentials for that. Now, this guy is Argentinian. He's not a native English speaker, and there's a lot of errors and grammatical errors in this book. He self-published it, but hey, I had a publisher for my book, and they put me as being born in 1954, right? So I kind of forgive him for the grammatical errors, because if you've been to my website, I'm prone to those too. But this isn't as slick as a commercially published book, but it is very useful. I'll tell you one of the tips that he talked about in here that I've seen since then in other places that I really said, wow, that's some smart thinking. He said, Gold is great, as an investment hedge. But if there's an economic collapse, how are you going to go buy food, with a gold eagle? You're not going to get change. Nobody's going to have change. Are people going to believe that it's real? And if everybody's broke and you show up with the only money that you have is $1,000 bills, right? And you go to the store to go buy, a dollar Snicker bar. That's going to raise some eyebrows, right? And if people are, desperate, they follow you home, they kill you, they steal your stuff, right? So what he did, is he went down to pawn shops and lower end jewelry stores, Craigslist, not Craigslist because he didn't have, but those sorts of places, and got used jewelry, and especially like linked chains, right, or a bunch of wedding rings, and then he could go to the grocery store and be like, this ring is all that I have to feed my family, can I trade this for that, and then he'd just go home and put a new ring on, right? Or take his necklace off and say, this was passed down to my family, but I've got to eat. Can I give you 2 links for a gallon of gas, for a tank of gas? And then break the links of the chain, and so you've got barterable units of measure there, and it doesn't look like you're rich. It makes you look like you're desperate. Now you just go back to your safe and pull out another link chain, and that's the kind of tips that's in this book, and that's why I really recommend it. Even though if you're an English teacher, this book's probably going to drive you nuts. So anyway, I really like this book because this guy actually has been through it. So anyway, worth getting. I appreciate you watching. Until next time, you can always catch us online at theprepperbookshelf.com. Thanks. Hey, this is David with theprepperbookshelf.com, and I've got an interesting book for you that, unless you're a real hardcore do-it-yourselfer, you're probably not going to know anything about. This is from a guy named Stephen D. Chastain, and he's pretty well known in the home backyard foundry community. Writes a lot of neat books on casting metal, right? And he's got a good series of books on casting metal, but that's not what I want to talk about today. Today I want to talk about his book, Generators and Inverters, Building a Small Combined Heat and Power System for Remote Locations and Emergency Situations. And I know that's a lot of big title, but basically this guy is an engineer who has spent his life basically thinking of ways to be more self-reliant. And this is, once again, it's a how-to manual. Lots of charts, lots of graphics, little bit of why, but a whole lot of how. And in this book, basically, he takes an engine, car engine basically, and turns it into a generator. Talks about how to build the generator, how to convert engines to work on biofuel, how to use carburetors. A very interesting thing in this book that I'm going to use in an upcoming project is he talks about casting flywheels, and he gives you the formula in how to cast your flywheel, because it's got to be of a certain weight per the RPM, but it has to be a certain thickness and a certain strength, because there's a lot of centrifugal force on a flywheel, and if you don't build it correctly, it can shatter and throw pieces of it, through your wall. And so he talks about how to design a flywheel properly. Talks about cooling systems and how to use waste heat from your radiator to do other work. Some of the things he talks about: design any size power plant that you need, convert auto engines to generators, design and build propane carburetors, how to run your internal combustion engine off of propane. Awesome. Remote starters, engine protection devices, engine governors, silencing your generator, stopping vibration, running on alternative fuels, including biodiesel. And I'll tell you, he's got another book on how to recycle waste oil, motor oil, and use a centrifuge in order to turn it into fuel. That's a good book too. How to select proper batteries and chargers and inverters, inverter waveforms and why it matters. why pure sine wave is is better than a modified sine wave for certain things. How to filter waste fuel, a whole bunch of stuff in this book. A little bigger, a little more detailed than some of the other do-it-yourself books that I have, but he's packed a whole lot of information into this book, and it is very useful. Just if you're designing a power plant for your bug out location, or your summer camp, or your whatever, your hunting cabin, this is a good book to get, because it talks about some of the problems and, more importantly, some of the solutions to that, and therefore you can make sure that you buy the right stuff and you don't waste your money. So, very useful book. So, I appreciate it, and until next time, you can always catch us online at theprepperbookshelf.com. Thanks.